I drove home alone that night. Nathan had offered to come with me, but I told him I wanted some time to think. The truth was, I didn't trust myself to speak. If I opened my mouth, I was afraid all the hurt I had been holding inside for years would come pouring out. When I got home, I sat in the dark living room and stared at the wall. My phone buzzed several times. Messages from Nathan. Then messages from his sister, Melissa. I ignored all of them. About an hour later, another message appeared. It was from Diane. I expected another insult, but instead it was a short message. Think carefully about your behavior tonight. This family deserves respect. I read it 3 times. Not once did she mention what she had said to me. Not once did she acknowledge how embarrassed I had been. In her mind, I was the problem. I put my phone down and finally cried. The next morning, I woke up exhausted. Nathan had spent the night at his brother's house. Around noon, he came home. He acted like nothing serious had happened. He sat at the kitchen table and asked if I had calmed down. That question alone made my stomach turn. I asked him if he truly believed I was the one who should apologize. He didn't answer right away. Then he said something that hurt more than anything his mother had ever said. He told me that maintaining peace with his family was more important than proving who was right. I stared at him in disbelief. To him, my feelings were less important than keeping his mother happy. The conversation quickly turned into an argument. For the first time in our marriage, I told him exactly how I felt. I told him I was tired of being treated like an outsider. I was tired of being judged. Most of all, I was tired of standing alone while my husband watched it happen. Nathan became defensive. He claimed I was making everything bigger than it was. But that was the moment something changed inside me. I stopped trying to convince him. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending myself. A few days passed with very little conversation between us. Then I overheard Nathan talking on the phone in his office. He didn't know I was home. I wasn't trying to listen, but I heard my name. I froze. Nathan laughed at something the person said. Then he said, "Rachel will get over it. She always does." The words hit me like a punch. For years, I had believed our marriage was built on love and respect. Standing there outside that office door, I began wondering if I had been the only one who believed that. After overhearing Nathan's phone conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened over the years. For a long time, I convinced myself that his family's behavior wasn't personal. I told myself they were just difficult people. I believed that if I stayed patient, eventually they would accept me. Looking back, I realize how wrong I was. The comparison started almost immediately after Nathan and I got married. His sister-in-law, Claire, was always treated like the perfect example of success. At every family event, someone found a reason to bring up her achievements. If Claire won a case at work, everyone celebrated. If Claire received a promotion, everyone talked about it for weeks. Meanwhile, whenever my work came up, the room would suddenly become quiet. The message was always clear. Claire impressed them. I didn't. One Thanksgiving, I spent 2 days helping prepare dinner. I cooked, cleaned, and helped organize the entire gathering. When dinner was served, Robert stood up and thanked almost everyone in the room. He thanked Claire. He thanked Nathan's brother. He even thanked a cousin who brought dessert. He never mentioned me once. Nobody seemed to notice except me. I sat there smiling while feeling invisible. Another Christmas, Diane handed out gifts to the family. When she reached me, she gave me a notebook and jokingly said maybe I could use it to find a real career. Several people laughed. I forced a smile because I didn't want to ruin the holiday. Nathan later told me she was only joking. That became his answer for everything. They didn't mean it that way. Don't take it personally. Just let it go. Year after year, I followed that advice. I swallowed my feelings. I stayed polite. I showed up to every birthday party, every holiday dinner, and every family gathering. No matter what I did, nothing changed. The more effort I made, the less they seemed to respect me. What hurt most was realizing that Nathan saw everything. He watched the comments. He heard the jokes. He knew exactly how they treated me. Yet he always expected me to be the bigger person. The peace he wanted always came at my expense. Nobody ever asked his family to stop. Nobody ever expected them to apologize. The responsibility somehow always landed on me. As I thought about all those years, a difficult truth became impossible to ignore. I had spent so much time trying to earn their approval that I never stopped to ask whether they deserved my effort in the first place. For the first time, I wasn't wondering how to fix the situation. I was wondering why I had tolerated it for so long. And the more I thought about that question, the more uncomfortable answers began appearing. Maybe the problem wasn't only Nathan's family. Maybe the problem was much closer to home. The following week, I focused on work and avoided unnecessary conversations with Nathan. We were living in the same house, but it felt like we were worlds apart. One afternoon, I was searching for a tax document we needed for our accountant. Nathan usually kept household paperwork in a cabinet inside his office. While looking through a folder, I noticed several printed emails. At first, I wasn't paying much attention. Then I saw my name. I froze. The emails were between Nathan and his father. My hands started shaking as I read them. Nathan had shared information about my business that I had told him in confidence. Client numbers, revenue reports, business challenges, private details that nobody outside my company should have known. The worst part wasn't the information itself. It was the comments that followed. Robert had responded with jokes about my business. Nathan replied with laughing comments of his own. I kept reading. There were more emails, more conversations. Some went back several years. Again and again, Nathan discussed my work with family members. Sometimes he complained about me. Sometimes he shared details about projects I was handling. Sometimes he allowed them to mock me without saying a single word in my defense. I sat down in his office chair because I suddenly felt weak. Everything started making sense. The comments, the insults, the strange questions they asked during family events. They knew things they should never have known. Nathan had been feeding them information all along. When he came home that evening, I placed the emails on the kitchen table. His face changed the second he saw them. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked one simple question. How long have you been doing this? Nathan sighed as if he was tired of the conversation before it even started. Instead of apologizing, he immediately began making excuses. He claimed he was only talking to family. He said he never meant any harm. He insisted they were interested in my business because they cared about our future. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him why he shared information that wasn't his to share. He shrugged. Then he said something that completely changed the way I saw him. He told me I was overreacting. According to him, none of it was a big deal. That answer hurt more than the emails themselves. He wasn't sorry. He didn't regret it. He genuinely believed he had done nothing wrong. For years, I thought the biggest problem in my life was earning respect from his family. Now I understood something important. The people mocking me had only been part of the problem. The person I trusted most had opened the door for them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every memory through a different lens. And with each memory, the picture of my marriage became harder to recognize. I wasn't looking at a partnership anymore. I was looking at a relationship where trust had been quietly broken long before I ever noticed. Over the next several days, I stopped focusing on arguments with Nathan. There was no point. Every conversation ended the same way. Instead, I threw myself into work. One evening, I was organizing household files for upcoming tax paperwork. Nathan and I kept financial documents in a locked cabinet. Since I handled most of our personal finances, I had access to everything. As I sorted through the records, I noticed several documents related to Robert's company. Normally, I would have ignored them. But something caught my attention. A few numbers didn't make sense. I looked closer. Then I looked again. The transactions weren't necessarily illegal on the surface, but they were unusual. Money seemed to be moving between different accounts without a clear business purpose. Some payments were labeled vaguely. Others appeared to be connected to projects that I had never heard anyone mention before. The more I reviewed the paperwork, the more questions I had. Because consulting work had taught me how to spot financial patterns, certain details immediately stood out. I wasn't searching for problems. The problems practically jumped off the page. Over the years, I had attended countless family dinners and business celebrations. At the time, I paid little attention when Robert talked about company finances. Now old conversations started coming back to me. I remembered hearing two executives discussing delayed payments during a Christmas party. I remembered Robert suddenly changing subjects when someone asked about a major contract. I remembered Diane insisting that everything at the company had never been better. At the time, those moments seemed harmless. Now they felt different. I started making notes for myself. Nothing dramatic. Just dates, numbers, and observations. As the pieces came together, a pattern began to emerge. The public image of the company didn't match what the records suggested. The family always presented themselves as successful, powerful, and financially secure. Behind closed doors, the reality looked far less stable. A few days later, I reviewed additional records that were available through public business filings. What I found only increased my concerns. Several financial statements raised serious questions. Certain figures appeared inconsistent. Some business decisions seemed unusually risky. I wasn't making accusations. I was simply following facts. And the facts weren't adding up. For years, Nathan's family acted as though they were smarter than everyone around them. They especially enjoyed questioning my professional abilities. Yet the more information I uncovered, the more I realized something surprising. The people who spent years criticizing me might have been hiding significant problems of their own. I kept everything to myself. I didn't tell Nathan. I didn't confront anyone. I simply continued gathering information and documenting what I found. By the end of the week, I was staring at a collection of records that painted a troubling picture. And for the first time, I understood why some family members seemed so desperate to protect the company's reputation. Because if the truth ever became public, the image they had spent years building could collapse overnight. A few days later, Nathan told me that Diane was hosting another family gathering on Saturday evening. The moment he mentioned it, I knew exactly what it was really about. This wasn't a family dinner. It wasn't a celebration. It was an opportunity for them to pressure me into giving the apology they believed I owed them. Nathan didn't even try to hide it. He sat across from me at breakfast and said his mother wanted everyone to move forward. Then he added that the easiest solution would be for me to apologize. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe we were still having the same conversation. I asked him what exactly I was supposed to apologize for. He couldn't give me a clear answer. Instead, he repeated that the family relationship was suffering and someone needed to fix it. According to him, that someone was me. Over the next several days, he brought it up repeatedly. Sometimes before work. Sometimes during dinner. Sometimes right before bed. The message never changed. If I apologized, everything could go back to normal. But I no longer wanted normal. Normal was years of disrespect. Normal was staying silent while other people decided my value. Normal was pretending nothing was wrong. By Thursday, I finally told Nathan I would attend the gathering. The relief on his face was immediate. He assumed I had finally given in. For the first time in weeks, he seemed happy. He even thanked me for being reasonable. I didn't argue. I simply nodded. The truth was, I had already made an important decision. It had nothing to do with apologizing. Friday evening, Diane called me herself. Her voice was unusually pleasant. She said she was glad I had come to my senses. Then she mentioned how much the family would appreciate hearing me take responsibility. The confidence in her voice was impossible to miss. She had already decided how the evening would end. As far as she was concerned, the matter was settled. Everyone expected me to walk into that house, lower my head, and admit I was wrong. Nobody imagined any other outcome. Saturday finally arrived. I got ready without feeling nervous. That surprised even me. In the past, family gatherings always filled me with anxiety. This time felt different. I wasn't worried about what anyone might say. I wasn't concerned about their opinions. For the first time, their approval didn't matter. When Nathan and I arrived, several relatives greeted us. The atmosphere felt strangely formal. People smiled, but there was tension underneath every conversation. It was obvious they were all waiting for something. Diane looked especially pleased when she saw me. She welcomed everyone into the dining room and began organizing seats. I noticed the confident expressions around the table. They truly believed I had come to surrender. I sat down calmly and looked around the room. Nobody realized that while they were focused on getting an apology from me, I was focused on something entirely different. And before the night was over, everything they expected was about to change. Earlier that same day, before Nathan and I left for the gathering, I sat alone in my home office looking at the notes I had collected over the past several weeks. I had reviewed every document multiple times. I had checked dates, records, and public filings carefully. The more I looked at everything, the more convinced I became that the information deserved attention from someone qualified to evaluate it. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting even with Diane or proving a point to Nathan. The issues I had uncovered were bigger than family arguments. For several days, I had been thinking about what to do. Finally, I made a decision. I searched through my professional contacts and found the number of someone I had worked with years earlier. His name was Mark Henderson. Mark specialized in financial compliance and corporate investigations. During a consulting project years ago, we had worked together closely and developed mutual respect. I called him that afternoon. When he answered, he sounded surprised to hear from me. After a brief conversation, I explained that I had come across information that raised concerns. I was careful with my words. I didn't make accusations. I didn't exaggerate. I simply explained the facts I had found and asked whether they seemed unusual to him. Mark listened quietly. Several times he asked specific questions. I answered only with information I could verify. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. By the end of it, his tone had changed. He no longer sounded casually curious. He sounded concerned. Mark told me that if the information was accurate, it deserved a closer review by the proper professionals. I agreed. That was exactly why I had called. Before ending the conversation, I sent him copies of publicly available records along with the notes I had organized. Everything was factual. Everything could be verified. Nothing was based on assumptions. Once the email was sent, I felt strangely calm. For weeks I had been carrying the burden of deciding what to do. Now the information was in the hands of someone qualified to evaluate it properly. Whatever happened next would happen because of facts, not because of emotions. Later that evening, as I sat at Diane's dining table surrounded by family members, nobody had any idea that phone call had already taken place. Robert laughed comfortably with relatives. Diane moved around the room, acting like she was in complete control. Nathan seemed relieved that I was cooperating. Everyone was focused on the apology they expected from me. No one was thinking about financial records. No one was thinking about investigations. No one was thinking about consequences. The process had started quietly. There had been no threats. No dramatic confrontations. No public accusations. Just one phone call. One professional conversation. One decision to place facts into the hands of someone who knew what to do with them. As I looked around the table, I realized something. The people sitting there believed they controlled the situation. What they didn't know was that events were already moving forward without their knowledge. And there was no way to stop them now. Dinner had barely started when Diane stood up from her chair and tapped her glass with a spoon. The room became quiet immediately. Everyone knew what was coming. She smiled and looked directly at me. Then she began talking about family, respect, and forgiveness. Several relatives nodded along as she spoke. I noticed Claire watching me from across the table. Nathan sat beside me, clearly expecting me to say something soon. Diane finally finished her speech and turned toward me. The room fell completely silent. She asked if there was anything I wanted to say. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. At first, nobody paid much attention. One of Nathan's cousins got up to answer it. A few moments later, the cousin returned looking confused. Behind him were two professionally dressed men carrying briefcases. The entire room went silent again. One of the men politely asked to speak with Robert. The smile disappeared from Robert's face almost instantly. He stood up slowly and walked toward them. The men introduced themselves and explained that they needed information regarding several financial matters connected to the company. The change in the room was immediate. A few seconds earlier, everyone had been focused on me. Now all attention shifted to Robert. Diane quickly stepped in and asked if the discussion could wait until another time. The men remained calm, but explained that they had specific questions that required prompt answers. Robert's face turned pale. I had never seen him look nervous before. Not once in all the years I had known him. Nathan looked completely confused. He kept glancing between his father and the visitors as if trying to understand what was happening. Other relatives started whispering among themselves. The comfortable confidence that usually filled the room was gone. One of the visitors mentioned several transactions that required clarification. The moment those details were mentioned, Robert became defensive. He insisted there had been a misunderstanding. The visitors calmly asked for supporting records. Nobody seemed prepared for that request. Diane attempted to change the subject several times. It didn't work. The conversation continued. Questions led to more questions. Soon family members who normally acted certain about everything suddenly had very few answers. I remained seated and watched quietly. For years, these people had questioned my judgment, my intelligence, and my professionalism. Now they were struggling to explain issues connected to their own business decisions. The irony wasn't lost on me. Nathan eventually looked at me. There was confusion in his eyes, but also something else. For the first time, he seemed to realize that I had understood something long before anyone else. The gathering completely fell apart after that. People stopped eating. Conversations ended. Several relatives left early. The evening Diane had carefully planned was gone. As guests quietly gathered their belongings, I looked around the room. The image that family had spent years protecting was beginning to crack. And once those cracks appeared, everyone could finally see what had been hiding underneath. The days after the gathering were filled with tension. Nathan spent most of his time speaking with lawyers, accountants, and company employees. Every day seemed to bring new information. At first, he believed there had simply been a misunderstanding. Then more records surfaced. More questions followed. The deeper he looked, the more shocked he became. One evening, he came home much later than usual. I was sitting in the living room reading when he walked in. He looked exhausted. Not physically tired. Emotionally drained. Without saying much, he sat down across from me. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Then he finally told me the truth. There were business decisions that had been kept hidden from him. Certain financial activities had been handled by a small group of people inside the company. Important details had never been shared with him. The father he trusted had deliberately left him in the dark. Nathan looked completely defeated. He kept shaking his head as he talked. Again and again, he said he couldn't believe it. The confidence he always had in his family was disappearing. For the first time, he was seeing them without excuses. A few days later, he learned something else. His name had appeared on documents connected to company activities he knew nothing about. That discovery terrified him. He suddenly understood how serious the situation could become. If things had continued, he might have become involved in problems he never created. That realization changed everything. One night, he came into my office while I was working. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. He quietly closed the door behind him. Then he apologized. Not the quick apologies people give to end an argument. A real apology. He admitted he should have listened to me. He admitted he had ignored warning signs. He admitted he had failed to protect me when his family treated me badly. For a moment, I saw genuine regret. Nathan told me that I had probably saved him from much bigger problems. If I had stayed silent, he might never have discovered what was happening. Then he asked me for another chance. He said we could rebuild. He said things would be different. He promised he would stand beside me from now on. As he spoke, I listened quietly. Months earlier, hearing those words would have meant everything to me. Now they felt different. The damage wasn't caused by one mistake. It wasn't caused by one family dinner. It wasn't caused by one argument. It came from years of choices. Years of broken trust. Years of putting everyone else ahead of our marriage. I could see that Nathan was finally understanding the truth. The problem was that I had already changed. The woman sitting across from him was no longer waiting for his approval or protection. I cared about him. Part of me always would. But for the first time since we met, I wasn't looking at him as my future. I was looking at him as someone who had arrived too late. And deep down, I think he knew it too. After that conversation, everything in my life felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was more like the silence that comes after a storm, when you finally notice what is still standing and what is gone. Nathan tried to talk to me every day. Sometimes he brought coffee to my desk. Sometimes he waited for me after work. Sometimes he sent long messages explaining how things could still improve. I listened, but I didn't respond the way he hoped. There was no shouting between us anymore. No arguments. Just distance. During this time, I started paying attention to my own thoughts more than anyone else's. For years, I had measured my days by other people's approval. If they were satisfied, I felt okay. If they were disappointed, I felt like I had failed. Now that pattern was breaking. One evening, Nathan asked me if I had made a decision about us. I told him I needed space. He didn't argue, but I could see he already understood what that meant. A few days later, I packed a small suitcase. Not everything, just the things I needed for a temporary stay elsewhere. When I carried it out of the house, Nathan stood in the hallway watching me. He didn't try to stop me. That made it feel even more real. I stayed at a quiet rented place across town. The first night there, I couldn't sleep properly. Not because I was sad, but because I wasn't used to the stillness. There was no tension in the air. No expectation waiting in every room. Just space. At the same time, things were changing outside my life. Nathan's family was no longer the center of attention they used to be. People who once praised them started stepping back. Business contacts became careful in their conversations. Some meetings were postponed. Others never happened again. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was slow, like doors quietly closing one by one. I didn't take part in any of it. I didn't need to. I had already stepped away from that world. Nathan kept trying to reach me. At first, I answered a few calls. Then I stopped. Not out of anger. Just because every conversation pulled me back into something I was trying to leave behind. One morning, I woke up and realized something simple. I wasn't waiting for anyone's approval anymore. I wasn't preparing for the next family gathering. I wasn't trying to fix a system that never valued me in the first place. For the first time in years, my choices were mine alone. I could work without being questioned. I could breathe without being judged. I could think without hearing someone else's opinion first. The life I had stepped into wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that honesty, I started to understand something I had ignored for a long time. Peace doesn't always come from fixing what is broken. Sometimes it comes from walking away from what keeps breaking you. Months passed in a way that felt completely different from before. My days were no longer filled with stress about family expectations or emotional pressure from constant arguments. I focused on work, clients, and rebuilding my routine. Slowly, my consulting business grew stronger than ever. New clients came through recommendations. Old contacts returned with new projects. People started trusting my judgment again in a way I had not experienced for a long time. For the first time in years, I felt steady in my own life. There was no need to explain myself to anyone who refused to listen. There was no need to defend my choices. I built my schedule around my own goals, not other people's opinions. One afternoon, I received a message from Nathan. It was short. He asked if we could talk one last time. After some thought, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe. Nathan looked different from before. Not just tired, but more serious, like someone who had been carrying the weight of too many mistakes for too long. He didn't try to justify anything anymore. He simply admitted that he had failed me as a husband. He said he should have stood by me when it mattered most. He said he had ignored things he should have confronted earlier. There was no anger in his voice, only regret. A few days after that meeting, I also received messages from Diane and Robert. They both expressed regret in their own way. Their words were careful, almost formal, but the meaning was clear. They had finally understood that things could not go back to how they used to be. I read everything calmly. I didn't respond immediately. When I finally did, my message was simple. I acknowledged their words but made no promises about the future. After that, there were no more meetings. No more discussions. Just silence. Over time, I realized something important. What had happened was not about winning or losing. It was not about exposing anyone or watching consequences unfold. Those things had already happened on their own. What truly changed my life was something deeper. It was the moment I stopped measuring my worth through people who never valued it. It was when I stopped trying to earn respect from those who only offered criticism. And it was when I chose a life where my voice mattered without needing permission. The greatest shift wasn't what happened to them. It was what happened inside me. I learned that respect is not something you beg for. It is something you recognize you deserve. And once you understand that, you stop returning to places where it is missing. In the end, I understood something very clearly. The apology they once demanded from me was never mine to give. It belonged to them all along. And I no longer needed to wait for it to feel whole.